late 2021, two software developers had roughly $50,000 tied up in GPU mining rigs in their New Jersey basements. The machines had mined some Ethereum, but according to the founders, not enough to pay for themselves. And a much larger problem was approaching. Ethereum was preparing to replace proof-of-work mining with proof-of-stake. Once that happened, graphics cards would no longer produce valid Ethereum blocks. The hardware would still work. It just would not have its original job. So Zhen and Pardeep Singh tried something else. They converted the rigs into AI servers, built a simple interface around them, and in March 2022, Zhen posted the product on Reddit. The offer was unusually direct: free GPU time in exchange for honest feedback. The post listed 3 machines: 12 RTX 3070, 4 RTX 3080, and 2 RTX 3090. The fleet totaled 18 GPUs. 4 years later, Runpod said it had passed $120 million in annual recurring revenue. The company then announced a $100 million investment in June 2026 at a $1 billion valuation. Both milestones come from Runpod and should not be mistaken for proof of profit. The real story is how 3 basement servers became a product developers were willing to build businesses on, and what Runpod had to become after the Reddit experiment worked. Zhen and Pardeep had worked together as corporate developers at Comcast. During the pandemic, they joined a familiar trade: buying consumer GPUs to mine Ethereum. This was not a giant industrial mine. Pardeep later described driving around Pennsylvania and New York City, searching for whatever GPUs he could find. He wrote that he initially put about $15,000 into the effort, then added another $10,000 to upgrade his rigs into more capable AI servers. Zhen later described the combined hardware in their 2 basements as being worth about $50,000. Those numbers come from the founders. There is no public receipt or audited inventory, and the figures may reflect different moments in the build-out. What matters is the shape of the decision. They owned expensive computing hardware whose most obvious source of income had an expiration date. Ethereum completed the merge on September 15, 2022, but Runpod appeared on Reddit 6 months earlier. They did not wait for the shutdown and then search for a trend. They moved while the old use was still alive. That timing matters because the usual version of this story is too neat. It sounds as if artificial intelligence arrived, 2 miners noticed, and the machines instantly became valuable again. The real conversion was harder. A mining rig is optimized to repeat a narrow computation. An AI developer needs storage, networking, containers, drivers, remote access, predictable environments, and a way to recover work after a machine stops. The GPU was useful. The surrounding experience was not yet a product. Pardeep experimented with using his hardware for AI and with offering compute through existing sites. His judgment was blunt. The experience was mediocre. He believed he could build something better, while admitting he had no idea how to market it. That is the first useful business lesson in this story. The opportunity was not just that GPUs were expensive. Expensive hardware alone creates a rental market. It does not explain why one rental platform wins. The deeper problem was everything between choosing a GPU and doing useful work. On a traditional cloud, a developer might need to choose an instance family, configure storage, understand networking rules, expose the correct ports, install drivers, manage a machine image, and make sure the environment survives after the instance stops. Large companies can assign an infrastructure team to that work. An independent developer trying a new model often cannot. In early 2022, plenty of people experimenting with machine learning were not infrastructure engineers. A researcher might have a model but no practical place to run it. Someone building an image tool might only own a laptop. Even developers who could afford a graphics card had good reason not to spend thousands of dollars before an idea had survived its first test. Runpod's first public post already reflected this distinction. Alongside the GPU specifications, it mentioned persistent storage and the ability to stop and resume a machine. SSH and Jupyter were available, ports could be exposed, and environment variables could be saved. Stripe handled payment. It was a surprisingly practical list for such an early product. That list is more important than the origin myth. The founders were not merely saying, "We own GPUs." They were saying, "Here are the steps we removed between you and the GPU." This is the product mechanism behind the story. Turn raw compute into a repeatable developer workflow. The first Runpod fleet was small enough to describe in one Reddit post. Machine 1 had 12 RTX 3070, a Threadripper Pro processor, 192 gigabytes of memory, and 3 terabytes of NVMe storage. Machine 2 had 4 RTX 3080s and more memory. Machine 3 had 2 RTX 3090. Free access had to be scheduled because there were not enough machines for everyone. The rules said users needed a real project. Idle machines could be reclaimed. And there was one line that now reads like a summary of the entire pivot. "No mining for free here, please." The current Runpod console is much more polished, but the basic product logic is visible in the same sequence. The current flow begins with a GPU list showing memory, availability, and hourly price. After choosing one, the user picks a container template and configures storage and networking. The final deployment panel separates the GPU charge from the container disk and network volume, so the number that first catches your eye is not necessarily the whole bill. I took the current deployment flow as far as I could without purchasing compute. This was not a performance benchmark. I did not launch a paid workload, measure inference speed, or test reliability. Even without launching a workload, the purchase flow was revealing. Several GPU options showed out of capacity during my July 31 test. The pricing was clearer than I expected, although I had to slow down at the storage settings to understand what would continue billing after a machine stopped. Runpod bills compute by the millisecond, while persistent storage is a separate charge. That creates a more honest picture than the simple claim that cloud GPUs are cheap. The GPU price is only one part of the bill, and a stopped machine is not always a free machine. It is tempting to describe Reddit as Runpod's marketing breakthrough. That is true, but incomplete. The original post was not a polished launch campaign. Zhen opened by apologizing in case he had misunderstood the community rules. He explained the limited hardware, listed the specifications, offered access, and asked people to join Discord or email support. The offer worked because it combined 3 things. First, it was placed in a community where the problem already existed. The founders did not need to convince deep learning developers that GPU access was useful. Second, the free compute had a clear exchange attached to it. This was not a permanent free tier. It was the cost of product research. Runpod was trading scarce machine time for information about where the workflow failed. Third, the post was specific. It named the cards, memory, storage, access methods, and limitations. A developer could decide whether the machines were useful without sitting through a sales call. This is why post on Reddit is the wrong lesson. A community notices when a founder arrives only to extract attention. Runpod arrived with working capacity, a functioning product, and permission for early users to criticize it. The distribution channel and the product development loop were the same system. Reddit brought the users. Discord and direct support captured the problems. The product changed. Positive experiences brought more users. Years later, Dell Technologies' capital partner Radhika Malik reportedly found Runpod through those Reddit posts. Hugging Face co-founder Julian Shomon was already using the product and contacted the company through support before investing. The early community was not just an audience. It became product research, customer support, word of mouth, and eventually investor discovery. The founders say Runpod reached $1 million in revenue within roughly 9 months of launching. TechCrunch later reported that they bootstrapped the company to more than $24 million in revenue before the outside funding story became central. Neither figure is independently audited in the sources available for this video. The precise accounting period behind the $24 million figure is also not clear enough to treat it as ARR. The responsible version is simple. According to the founders and subsequent reporting, revenue arrived quickly, and the company was already operating at meaningful scale before its first institutional round. There's a reason revenue mattered early. Zhen wrote that Runpod never maintained a permanent free tier. The business had to pay for itself, even when it was not producing much profit. For almost 2 years, the founders say they operated without venture capital or debt and expanded through data center partnerships. That constraint shaped the product. A free developer tool can optimize for signups. A compute business has to care about whether usage pays for the machine time behind it. The hard part is that revenue growth can conceal weak economics. If a cloud rents $1 of compute capacity and resells it for $1.05, the top line can grow rapidly while little value remains. Runpod has not publicly disclosed enough detail for us to calculate its margins or profitability. That is why the revenue milestones are evidence of demand, not proof that the business is financially easy. Runpod now presents 3 major ways to consume compute: pods, serverless, and clusters. Pods are the most direct continuation of the original product. A developer selects a GPU-backed machine and pays while that instance runs. It is useful for experimentation, development, fine-tuning, rendering, or any workload where the user wants control of the environment. Serverless changes the unit of purchase. Instead of keeping one machine running, a developer creates an endpoint with workers that respond to requests. Flex workers can scale down when idle. Active workers stay available for workloads that need lower latency. Billing includes the time workers spend starting, executing requests, and waiting through the configured idle timeout. Clusters address larger multi-node jobs, where networking between machines becomes part of the product rather than a detail the user can ignore. In each product, the card is only the starting point. What customers actually pay for is the ability to find capacity, launch a known environment, keep data in the right place, expose an endpoint, and receive a bill without assembling those pieces themselves. Runpod wraps that workflow around capacity supplied through its infrastructure partners. The July 31 snapshot illustrates that packaging. The A100 PCIe cost $1.39 per hour. The H100 PCIe was $2.89, while the L40 was 99 cents. Prices and regions vary, and those machines are not identical to configurations offered by other clouds. For example, an AWS or CoreWeave instance may bundle 8 GPUs with stronger interconnects, far more CPU and memory, and a different service level. Dividing an 8 GPU server price by 8 creates a useful reference, but it does not mean a customer can rent 1/8 of that server. The fair conclusion is narrower. In this snapshot, Runpod offered a lower entry price for several single GPU configurations. That accessibility is part of the product. It does not prove that Runpod is always the cheapest option for every workload. In January 2026, Runpod publicly announced that it had surpassed $120 million in annual recurring revenue. ARR converts the current pace of recurring business into an annual figure. That makes it a useful growth signal, but an easy one to misread. It is not cash collected during the previous 12 months or a measure of gross profit, and it does not reveal what Runpod paid for the GPU capacity behind the revenue. This distinction is especially important in infrastructure. A software company can serve another customer at a very low marginal cost. A GPU workload consumes scarce hardware, electricity, networking, storage, and data center capacity. If usage rises, some costs rise with it. Runpod also reported strong supporting metrics, including sign-up growth and net dollar retention. Those figures suggest that existing customers were expanding, but they remain company-reported. Runpod is private, and this video does not have audited financial statements. The correct interpretation is not that the $120 million figure is meaningless. It is a strong demand signal. Customers were paying repeatedly and increasing usage. The mistake would be turning that signal into an invented claim about profit. In fact, Runpod's story becomes more interesting when we keep the uncertainty. The company had found real demand. Now it had to prove that it could deliver infrastructure reliably enough and efficiently enough for that demand to become a durable business. In May 2024, Runpod announced a $20 million seed round co-led by Intel Capital and Dell Technologies Capital. The announcement said the platform had more than 100,000 developers at the time. That financing arrived after the founders say they had spent almost 2 years building without institutional capital. It also marked a change in what the company needed to become. An enthusiast will tolerate a rough edge if the GPU is affordable and support is responsive. A production customer needs predictable capacity, security, compliance, observability, support, and confidence that the platform will still be available when its own customers arrive. By June 2026, Runpod announced a $100 million growth investment led by Summit Partners at a $1 billion valuation. The company said more than 1 million developers were building on the platform. The user count timeline needs care. Runpod described about 500,000 developers in material published around January 2026, while pages updated later displayed more than 1 million. The safest claim is that the company reported more than 1 million by June 2026, not necessarily at the January ARR announcement. The new capital was meant to expand the platform, engineering, and developer experience. But capital also changes expectation. A basement product can be judged by whether it works for the next user. A billion-dollar infrastructure company is judged by whether it can keep working for customers whose own businesses depend on it. Reddit can still help Runpod hear what developers want. It cannot provide the capacity planning, security work, or operational discipline that production customers now expect. Runpod faces at least 5 structural risks. The first is supply. If a popular GPU is out of capacity, a low displayed price is not a usable product. During my console review, several GPUs were unavailable. One short test does not measure the whole platform, but it demonstrates the basic constraint. Software cannot schedule capacity that does not exist. The second is utilization. Reserved capacity that sits idle still costs someone money. Too little inventory frustrates customers. Too much inventory damages economics. Matching unpredictable AI demand to expensive hardware is the central operating problem of a GPU cloud. Third is reliability. A hobbyist can restart a notebook. A company serving production inference may lose customers when an endpoint fails. Public community discussions include complaints about availability, documentation, support, and debugging serverless workloads. Individual posts do not establish a platform-wide failure rate, but they show the standard Runpod is now being measured against. Fourth is competition. Oz, Google, and Microsoft offer deep enterprise relationships and broad cloud ecosystems. CoreWeave specializes in large-scale GPU infrastructure. Lambda, vast. AI, modal, together AI, replicate, and others attack different layers of the same developer problem. Runpod must remain simpler than a hyperscaler, more dependable than a loose marketplace, and flexible enough that customers do not outgrow it. Fifth is price sensitivity. Developers can move experimental workloads when another provider offers a cheaper card. Templates and workflow reduce that friction, but raw compute is still easier to compare than most software products. Runpod's asset-light partnerships may reduce the danger of buying every GPU itself, but they also create dependence on outside capacity. Owning hardware can improve control and potentially margins. It also adds debt, depreciation, power commitments, and operational complexity. This leaves Runpod with an awkward trade-off. More control over the physical stack may improve reliability and economics, but it also puts more expensive hardware and long-term commitments on the company. Too little control creates a different dependency. Management has to keep choosing where that line belongs as the business grows. Runpod benefited from timing. The founders owned GPUs before AI demand accelerated. Stable diffusion and open source models created a growing population of developers who needed those GPUs. Traditional clouds often felt too complex or too expensive for an experiment. But timing does not explain why the product survived. The founders recognized that the valuable layer was not simply the hardware. It was the reduction of friction around the hardware. They also found distribution before they built a conventional marketing organization. The original Reddit post did not manufacture a desire for compute. It entered a place where developers were already discussing the problem and offered something they could test immediately. The free GPU time was not generosity for its own sake. It bought feedback. The detailed hardware list created trust. Direct support shortened the distance between complaint and product change. Charging from the beginning forced the company to learn whether convenience was valuable enough to pay for. Later, the same product needed a different discipline: partnerships, capacity planning, enterprise reliability, and capital. The skills that get a product from zero to its first $1 million are not identical to the skills required to operate infrastructure at a $100 million revenue run rate. That transition is still underway. The financing and valuation do not prove it will succeed. They show that customers and investors believe the opportunity is large enough to try. Runpod did not begin with a prediction about artificial intelligence. It began with $50,000 of hardware that was about to lose its original purpose. Reddit posts created attention, but attention alone would have disappeared as soon as the free GPU time ended. The product survived because the problem was already real. Developers wanted access to powerful hardware without first becoming cloud infrastructure specialists. Runpod turned that complaint into a workflow, then turned the workflow into a business. Buying old mining rigs is not the lesson here, and copying the Reddit post would miss most of what made it work. The useful part is more ordinary. Runpod found people who already needed compute, watched where the workflow became irritating, and removed enough friction that some of them were willing to pay. The first 18 GPUs gave the founders something real to offer. Reddit put that offer in front of the right people. What came afterward was the difficult part: turning access to a few machines into a service developers could depend on. If Runpod keeps growing, it will be because customers spend less time thinking about the infrastructure and more time using it.